Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sayorius, and today we're going to be taking a look at every single anime I've seen for the winter season. So without further ado, I'm going to be going to my rankings, and if you want to follow along, or if you want to make your own list, feel free to click the link in the description. It will take you to the template I have on Tier Maker. So starting off, we're going to be talking about Frieren, Beyond Journey's End, and this show is already going to go into S tier. If you know anything about anime, you already know something about Frieren. It is an amazing show that takes your conventional type of fantasy storytelling and spins it on its head by having such an amazing character, an amazing premise, and really pushing the boundaries of what it means to tell a normal fantasy story. And the more you keep watching, the more you fall in love with the two different eras of characters. You fall into two different eras of setting, and you fall in love with just gorgeous animation from hardworking animators behind the scenes. So this is already just going on the top of the list, and I even am going to go a step further and say Frieren is the perfect show to put on your starter anime list. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you're recommending anime to friends and they haven't seen a single show, this should be on there, because anyone can go into this show and find something to take away from it. And that's why I think the beauty of Frieren is. Our next one is the Apothecary Diaries, another amazing show that really has a unique premise. It takes place in Imperial China, where there's apothecary gets kidnapped. And you know what she says when she gets kidnapped? Oh no, I've been kidnapped. That's just a little insight into Mao Mao, our main character here, and how she not only is one of the most unusual main characters we've gotten, but she is an amazing presence on the screen. Every time I see her, she is really making the show one of the best experiences I have seen when it comes to these historical fiction types of shows. This show manages to take what is very much could be a boring premise and talk about drugs and medicine, and adding a murder mystery spin on it that deals with the inner workings of the palace. You deal with, just the hierarchy, the structure of the existing emperor, and there's so many different facets that this show just explores, including like who the identity of Jinshin, our secondary main lead here, and his identity, because there's a whole mystery behind that as well. So funny enough too, because this show is just stands out as amazing with its characters and its premise, just like Frieren here, I also recommend to put this on your starter anime list for anyone watching. Like, if you haven't seen a single piece of anime, or have seen only like Attack on Titan, or JJK or Demon Slayer, I highly recommend checking out these shows, because I don't know, there's just something about Apothecary that just, like Frieren, you can find something to enjoy. There's something that pulls everyone in, and unlike a certain murder mystery show like My Star, oh, I don't want to talk about that, but unlike that, the story here remains to be very mature, and surprisingly, the more you watch the show, the more interesting it gets, and that is what you need with a perfect murder mystery show. I don't know, the Apothecary Diaries is just one of the shows that I think people will absolutely fall in love with if they give it the time of day. And from the offset, it does take a while for me. I actually waited a couple weeks before starting the show, because initially, visually, it doesn't look like something I would be interested in. But trust me, if you take that dive, you'll realize that this show is something truly special, and something it's once in a blue moon. And the fact that this and Frieren got released in the same season is still mind-blowing for me. So I'm going to throw this where it belongs. It deserves to be up there with Frieren. It is just such an amazing treat from beginning to end. And you can't go wrong with just unique premises. The more that I think about it, original content sometimes is worth the effort to put into. And I think we've sort of lost our way here in the West when it comes to, you know, all these remakes and just Hollywood in general, when we focus on trying to do things that have worked in the past and continuing that pattern instead of really focusing on trying to take risks and trying to tell stories that are very unique. So I don't know, I just love that about these two shows, that they're in their first season, they aren't continuations yet, and they are at the top of the top. So, and I mean, here's the thing, right? I'm not trying to trash sequels. I'm not trying to trash season 2s and onwards, because there's still value in continuing a story for the long form. And there's no better way to explain this than Classroom of the Elite, which is our next one on our list, which it's really been a guilty pleasure for me since season 1. And the fact that it got a season 2 was still crazy to me, because there was a huge gap in between, up there with Devil's a Part-Timer, where we didn't think that this would get a return to form actual sequel, but here we are, or not sequel, continuation. Classroom Elite continues to do what it does, but better. And what I love about this is that the more you keep watching, the more it builds on everything that you've learned and really elevates the stakes. And I can't just help but fall in love with this show, because I don't know, Anyana Koji is one of the most interesting main characters for me to see, because not only do I think, and I made a video on this, not only do I think that this character is not only not a hero, he's not a good person, I think he's an absolute villain. And although he is changing by the end of season 3, he is having a character arc where he could potentially change. I still believe that everything he's done is not natural for a human being, and it could be a product of his upbringing, it could be a product of his environment, but that doesn't excuse what he does for some moments in the show. And the only reason why you're rooting for him is because the things he does, the terrible things he does to people, are in the favor of people you like. So that's the only reason why. If it was against people if he aligned himself with people you didn't like, then you would see the villain that he is. But because you're looking at it through the lens of people that you value in terms of watching the show, it's not that big of a deal. So with Classroom Elite, I'm throwing this, this is tough. I want to put it in S, but I also want to reserve S for like the specific great, like the above and beyond shows that are absolutely exceptional, which like Frieren and Apothecary here. So I'm gonna drop it into a solid A. I think Classroom Elite season 3 is amazing. The fact that it got a continuation that isn't garbage, by the way, because Devil's a Part-Timer unfortunately did fall victim to the continuation curse, where it has been such a long amount of time, and when they returned, it wasn't the same. Classroom Elite was able to break through that and do it in 2 seasons. So I just wanted to share that, you know, I want more love for my boy here, and more love for everyone involved, because who knew that, you know, seeing the duel between Anyana Koji and the Class A president is still one of the most hype moments I've seen from an anime. And so that's why I think it deserves to be up there, because it's just hype, just pure hype. All right, now this one deserves to be an S, and I'm also gonna throw it up there. I don't know why I haven't done it sooner. I will say this is gonna be tough. Where should I put it in S? So when it comes to Delicious and Dungeon, the reason why I'm going to be putting it at the top of the top is because of one reason and one reason alone. Because it takes such a simple premise, such as just eating monsters in a dungeon, cooking monsters in a dungeon, and somehow not only making that interesting, engaging, fluid animation across the board with no deviations here or there, but also to create such an amazing, innovative, intriguing fantasy world to explore with the dungeon setting. And by the end, not only exploring on things touched upon in previous seasons, so although it could seem episodic, there is very much a main storyline happening with Dungeon Meshi here. But also everything coming to a head by the end of the first core. I think this deserves so much praise. And the fact that out of, you know, all the great shows this season, it is getting a little bit of recognition, but I want more. I want Frieren levels hype for the show too. Not taking away from Frieren. I want more people who love Frieren to check out this show, because Dungeon Meshi is an amazing ride throughout. Also, what's up with the elf waifus this season? They're just above and beyond amazing. Marcel is just so adorable and so relatable, and I mean, so is Frieren. So I don't know, just keep it up. Maybe there's a formula here. If you have great elves in your shows, you know, you're gonna do spectacular. Who knows? All right, so we're gonna sort of deviate from fantasy a little bit, and instead we're going to be focusing on just fantasy in terms of more of the My Hero Academia, I guess, niche when it comes to these shows, where it's people with powers less so than, you know, a fantasy setting with magic, right? So that's what Undead Unluck is. You can also say it's the magical index effect, where it's, you know, people with superpowers in modern day settings. And when it comes to Undead Unluck, unfortunately, I have to say that this show is very much a show I wanted to be amazing. I wanted the show to be amazing start to finish, but a little bit halfway through, you started to see a little bit of the animation problems, and they got a little bit lazy with the recaps, where it got Toei levels bad. And although I don't think the animation deviated at all, I think it was still pretty consistent. It was just a shame to see that, you know, they were getting the lazy route with like less time actually shown with the episodes. So because of that, I'm gonna knock it down a notch. But overall, in terms of this being a simple story and it getting a little bit more complicated later on, I'm gonna put this in B. I think that this show did its time. It has interesting characters, interesting premise. There's a big plot twist that I absolutely love to death, involving some of the main characters here. And the more that I watch the show, the more I kind of want to learn. I have more questions than answers, and I want to learn these answers. And there's some elements of the show that hold me back from really putting it with some of the best this season. And maybe it has to do with the long run time. Maybe it has to do with the pacing of the story or the way the story is written. But something is just missing from the show. And it could be that, you know, when it gets serious, it doesn't balance out the humor as well, or the humor doesn't hit as hard as like earlier moments within the show or the anime. I don't know, there's just something there. There is some emotional moments that do hit hard near the end though, and it does stick the landing and does hype you up near the end. But there's a gap, I think, right before that final arc in between that is just kind of there, where they're just kind of messing around, and I don't know how I feel about that. So that's why it's going in B. I don't think it's terrible. I think it's definitely above average, but yeah. With Ragna Crimson here, I kind of feel the same way, because Ragna, I wanted it to be good, because the premise was interesting. Imagine you failed, and you basically lost everything near and dear to you, but you eventually succeed with your goal at the end. But there's no point now. Everything and everyone you cared about has gone at this point. So there's no point in succeeding in the first place. What if you had a chance to undo that and instill upon your wisdom, your knowledge, your strength into a past self? So imagine like your college self. Everything you know and learned about your life in college and in high school, you can bestow upon your middle school self with. That's kind of what happens here with Ragna Crimson, is taking his future self in an alternate reality or alternate timeline and giving it to his past self to become an overpowered menace that isn't quite overpowered when he comes to fight some of the bigger players here. But with such an interesting premise, and it does, I will say, the first episode is kind of bad because half of it is kind of boring and generic. It really takes the latter half to really get you hooked into the show if you make it that far. But when you do, it really cements itself as a fun fantasy. It is very much a revenge fantasy that is one of the better revenge fantasies, I will say. But where I think Undead Unluck suffers from, like this show, is its inconsistency with maybe its pacing or its story. I don't know. Something was there where there were moments where I was just bored with it. It was just very slow. And I know it was hype. I know there were moments that were hype. The ending was absolutely incredible. But for me personally, I just felt like it was just kind of you know. At certain points, I just didn't want to return to it. I found myself wanting to fast forward through some of the exposition dumps and some of the moments where it was just, oh, we're just going to be talking about our plans and we're going to be building this up, or they're drawing out this big fight because it's a big war going on that I wasn't personally a fan of personally. So because of that, and because it nailed the ending, though, I will say I'm going to be putting it above Undead Unluck. It is still an above the average show. Definitely check it out if this type of show interests you. You can definitely check that. You will definitely know if you watch episode 1 if the show is for you or not. But yeah, I don't know if they just need to do a better job with the animation, because there was a lot of moments with the animation that were inconsistent, as well as just the pacing. I think could have been a little bit better. Or maybe it was just a product of the story itself. So that's just my thoughts on that. And okay, so this next one, a little bit of a controversial thing here. I'm actually not that upset with the adaptation of Solo Leveling. I think this was actually a pretty amazing adaptation. Where I think people's gripes are with Solo Leveling is in the format of manhwas, because what a lot of people don't understand with manhwas is it's a very different type of story being told than your traditional manga. Because with manga, from the get-go, you are hooked, you know what the story is about, and you can already, from like chapter 2, already get hyped on what's going to happen next, right? You're already within the meat and potatoes. With manhwa, you have to understand that it's all about build-up, specifically when it comes to this type of power scaling story. Like Jinwoo here, his whole purpose here is to level up, and you have to first establish who he is, his struggles, and starting off is very rough for him because he has to understand how his new gained ability works. And it's through his experiences and taking that time to flush him out and flush his mental psyche as he goes through both physical and mental and moral changes, like the moral implications of him going from someone who was weak but upbeat and smiled a lot to a cold and cunning and calculated menace is something that needs to be studied here. And I thought the way they handled this was fine. And the fact that we're getting season 2 makes me excited because it's just going to keep getting better and better. People just need to give this time to breathe. And for an adaptation, it is amazing. The animation also spectacular, music spectacular. And yeah, I know why people love Solo Leveling. I know why they love the manhwa. And now I know why people were like hyping up the anime so much. So I'm just going to do what Solo Leveling needs right now. It belongs in low A. It is not some of the best yet because it hasn't gone there yet. You have to let the story breathe. But I do believe later on, based on what I've been told, Solo Leveling will become an S tier anime. Just give it time. Maybe in season 2, maybe in season 3, but that is something left for the future. Shangri-La Frontier is a show also that I've been watching, and this one really stuck in my head because of its iconic opening. Its opening is so hype. It really gets your adrenaline pumping for an MMO of all things. You know, the thing where you put on your headset, it's the SAO thing where you basically lay in bed. That's what hypes you up for, but it is so good. It's not your stereotypical isekai because it's very much a video game version of that. So it's along the lines of like, say, you know, Sword Art Online, where you're playing a game But yeah, I think that this show, although it did lose steam near the end of the second core, because they kind of just, you know, wrapped up the big arc, so you have to have that breathing room in between arcs. This show is amazing. I love the action sequences. I love Sunraku. Sunraku's an amazing, charismatic lead, probably one of my favorites of the season. And I love his interactions with Emil, which is his sentient rabbit friend, which is really funny. So, because of just that alone, plus, you know, amazing action sequences, his design is very unique and stands out among the rest. I'm gonna throw him where he belongs, and that is in A tier, in between Classroom and Elite and Solo Leveling, because, man, you can't go wrong with it. And plus, there's just so many great moments with just, you know, jokes about the video game meta, to what it means to be an amazing gamer, to one of the trash gamers, because he's, you know, a connoisseur playing all these trash games, and what that means when he is given a game that is actually good and, you know, is operated correctly. You know, someone who has worked out and succeeded in games that have tons of bugs in them, and managing to do so much with it, given the proper tools to succeed. And, you know, I don't know, I just love something about Shangri-La Frontier, because there's just something wholesome about it, something upbeat, something fun about it. And if you're feeling down, this is one of the shows you definitely need to watch, specifically when you are watching shows this season that are very drama filled and drama heavy. You have a breathing room here where it's kind of upbeat and joyful. Even like, for example, like Undead Unluck went a little bit dramatic near the end. The more I think about it, Shangri-La Frontier is the one that really is the one that just stayed upbeat out of all these shows. That's kind of funny. But yeah, I digress. Or do I? Because Mashle is also one of those shows that's very much upbeat. Now, I know that the opening is iconic. This, you know, Creepy Nuts, you can't go wrong with them. I was already a big fan of them with Call of the Night, because the literal show, the premise of Call of the Night, was based off a song from Creepy Nuts. So the fact that Mashle just continued to use them, which means that not only are they amazing artists, they're amazing artists to make and give your openings. But yeah, no, it's just Mashle season 2, though, as much as I want to give it more praise, I actually think it's one of the most overrated shows this season because of the opening. I personally preferred season 1 of Mashle over season 2. Like, season 2 wasn't bad by any means. I just thought season 1 had a lot more fun moments in it, and a lot more crazy moments, and it was very much relaxed, and I didn't hate it for that. So because of that reason, because I don't think it was as good as season 1, I'm going to be putting it in high B. It is almost an A. But the reason why I think I wanted to drop it down a notch is because I feel like the ending when he was fighting Innocent Zero was just kind of anticlimactic. There was a cool fight where he saved the class and they were cheering him on against that giant, but overall I just wanted more from an ending that was very climactic, and all this did was just set up season 3 to be that awesome show, which isn't bad, but I just want to be honest here and say that it deserves to be above average, but it's not amazing or exceptional, if you know what I mean, like compared to season 1 at least. So at least that's what my thoughts are on season 2. Another season 2 funny, I don't know, I'm not planning these, am I? Where I'm just doing back-to-back season 2s, that's so funny. But Moonlit Fantasy season 2 is already gonna go up here for me. Boom. It is an high A tier because I love Makoto, and his 2 secondary characters here, Tome and Mio, are some of the and also Shiki too, are some of my favorite characters to watch. And this may be a guilty pleasure for me because it's a pure fantasy isekai story. Why did I say pure fantasy isekai? It's a pure isekai story in every sense you love. but there's just something about just taking what I consider a new wave of isekai, which I like to call Kingdom Seed, where you focus on building a kingdom or building a place where everyone in your circle gets to live peacefully and have fun and celebrate and train together. There's just something so wholesome about it, and so many great shows do this, like how that time I reincarnated into a slime does that all the time. All of these shows, the Dungeons or the Kingdom Seed shows, all focus on building community, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually something very endearing. And so, looking at this show, yes, were there slow moments with, like, whenever it wasn't focusing on Makoto, in my opinion, I was bored. Unless it was like the female hero. The male hero didn't interest me. He was just kind of generic. I didn't like when the female hero's party was like fighting and they had this sacrifice. I don't know. There's just something about it just felt slow. I don't know. Just something about Moonlit Fantasy stands out to me as just so endearing with knowing what it is, but also taking the opportunity to get hyped. Because at the end of season 1, there was a moment that really solidified this being one of my guilty pleasures when it comes to isekais, where Makoto basically crosses a line he didn't think he would. And the show didn't hype it up in any way. It just sort of happened. But the way they handled it and the maturity that comes with this show is why I love really good isekais. And I'm talking about the best of the best. And Moonlit Fantasy is definitely up there for one of them. And you can't go wrong with it. I love everything about this show. And if you want a good isekai, start Moonlit Fantasy. Or if you've seen season 1 and like season 1, start season 2. Because they're still going on. They're still going to go into a second core after this. And I can't stop gushing about this show. It's amazing. Now, this show is interesting for many reasons, because I don't know about you, but this show feels illegal. But it doesn't do anything illegal. Like, for example, there's a lot of lollies in the show. There's a lot of underage girls in the show. But the main character, who's a businessman, and he's, I think in his 30s, doesn't do anything to them. Instead, he has this wholesome relationship with his pet bird and travels between two different realities, a fantasy world and the real world. And he builds connections, he saves lives, he just establishes trade routes. So, overall, unless something changes, which I hope it doesn't, this show is fine. And this is the first time I'm actually gonna drop a show into C, because this show, as much as I love the fantasy aspects of the show, they'll jump to the real world. And they talk about these things called psychics, which are people with powers. And honestly, I'm kind of turned off by that, if I'm gonna be completely honest, because this show really hinges on the fact that there's this fantasy world that you can explore, you can establish trade routes, you can save people, there's the kingdom, there's coup d'etats, and you focus on the dumb people with powers who can shoot fire, or like you're fighting magical girls all of a sudden. And for me, I'm just not interested in that. So whenever it goes to like the real world, I'm just kind of bored and kind of zoned out. But then when it goes to the fictional fantasy world, it's all fun and games. So, I mean, it could be your cup of tea, it could be not. I just hope it just stays FBI free, and doesn't get weird, because then I'm just gonna be disappointed. But yeah, I mean, if you're watch the first episode, if you think this show would be for you, check it out. But just as a heads up, it really drags for me when it goes back to the real world. But that could just be me. If you want to check this out, I wouldn't recommend it, but I wouldn't say it's the worst thing ever. It's what I would put it in C. It's a mid show. That's a perfect way of describing it. Now, okay, so this one is kind of funny. So, bottom tier character Tomozaki is a show that my brother personally loves to death. He's been telling me about it for ages. And I've seen season 1. I actually saw season 1 before him, but he read ahead. And so he was telling me all these things, that it gets even better, the relationships get even more nuanced, and he was basically telling me that I should definitely check out season 2 when it drops. And so I did. And I was able to finish it a couple days ago. And I gotta say, I prefer season 1. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was because the arcs they covered, there were like 2 arcs, just didn't do it for me. I actually didn't like how it ended too. I didn't like how he ended up with a certain character as opposed to someone else. I don't know, that was just me. And I also think just him ending up in a relationship, it was too soon for the show. Because for me, the pacing of the show was he was working his way up to get close friends, and then he's like, oh, I'm now going to get into a relationship. I felt like he skipped a step. I would have preferred the season to focus on something else. And then the 3rd season, he gets into that arc. I don't know. There's just something about just the way they handled it, or the way the story was told, where it just didn't resonate as much to me as season 1 did. I thought the season 1 pacing was much better. But that's not to say that this isn't a fun show. I can definitely see the value in this. But unfortunately, and here's the thing, I'm not going to call it mid. I'm putting it in C. I'm not going to call it mid. Well, I'm going to call it, it's on the line between B and C. It's just on the highest C possible. That's just under B. Because I think that this show, now if it was season 1, I would put it in A. But since we're dealing with season 2 here, I don't know. There's just something where I want to give it more praise, but every time I do, I think of something they did that I didn't think was that great, A. And B, I thought I was like slowly losing interest. I don't know. That's just me though. Now this show came out of nowhere, and I don't know what I was expecting from this show, but it already cemented itself as one of the best. And we're talking about the wrong way to use healing magic, because this looks generic, and that's what I thought. And then I watched season 1, or I watched episode 1, and I was like, oh, the animation's kind of going crazy here. Oh, this character is actually kind of interesting. And oh, this mentor type character is doing something for me. And the more I kept watching the show, the more I just kind of thought to myself, dang, this is a good show. And although there are moments where I wasn't a big fan of the way they handled 2 of the character relationships, one, because he basically contributes nothing to the main story and is there to basically, I don't know, he's just there to be a part of the main trio, to call them a trio. But then the other character too, I'm not really a big fan of her, because the relationship she has with Usato, the main guy here, the main MC, the dude himself. I don't know, I just don't like their chemistry. I just think their chemistry is a little bit forced for the story purpose. And there's so many other characters that are more interesting that I want explored with him, rather than these 2 side characters, which are unfortunately attached to his hip because of spoiler reasons. But this isn't a bad show to get into. I just think if you want sort of a show where you can sit back, relax, it is sad, there are dramatic moments, but it's a very hopeful show. It has a hopeful message behind it. So because of that, I'm going to put it in high B. It's going to go over Mashle season 2. Yeah, if you want to check this out, I think this would, this would be a perfect show for people who don't like fan service in anime. Because there's very minimal here. I think there's barely any here. And it's more focused on trying to do right by your mentors and trying to not only save lives, but also prove yourself worthy of inheriting the mantle being passed on to you by your predecessors. There's something endearing about that. So if there is an underdog this season, there's only one show that I would say comes to mind and absolutely deserves it. And that is the Undead Unwanted Adventurer. This show is one of the most interesting shows I've seen because of its premise because of its world building, the fact that it takes its time to tell its own story. It doesn't try and rush into anything. It doesn't try to prove itself. It really just exists to basically talk about what happens when you die and you're an undead adventurer and no one wants you. I know it's weird, like that's like almost like the title of the show, but our main character here, Ren, is going through one of the worst experiences of his life, and that is stumbling across a place he shouldn't have and dying. But after surprisingly mysteriously surviving, but as a skeleton, his journey to climb the ranks and try and become more human becomes his priority. And exploring the world, exploring the mysteries, how this dungeon operates, it reminds me a lot of Solo Leveling with its mystery, as well as it does take elements of Shangri-La Frontier as well. And I don't know, there's just something great about it. And I think it is very much the underdog of the season. And it actually leaves off in a pretty good note. So I'm gonna throw this above healing magic here, because I think it deserves more love. And I will say it is borderline A tier. It is the highest of the highs for the B tier category. Villainess level 99. I may not be the bad guy. It's a long title. It's one of those shows, but this is what I will consider a safe show. It doesn't do anything amazing. It doesn't try and do anything amazing. It just tries to tell a fun story, and you know what it does? It tells a fun story. So if you want a show that really just exists to have fun, that's very lighthearted, upbeat, when you have all these shows that really go into deeper themes and deeper meanings, and you want to break from that, this is a perfect show for you. I actually really liked how this turned out. It wraps up in one season, so you're not waiting on season 2 or anything. I like the characters. The characters are cool. The power systems are cool. And I don't know, the best way I can describe the show is simple but sweet. And I can't hate that, you know? There's some shows where they just they know what they are and they just want to have fun. And I feel like this is just one of those shows. So, because I think its simplicity is just amazing, I'm gonna throw this in the highest of highs for C. Like, it is borderline B tier. And it's definitely not mid, but it's also not like exceptional by any means, and it doesn't have to be. I don't know, there's just something fun about that. Okay, and now we have to talk about this show. It's That Magical Girl Show. You know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to say the title here. Yes, I've seen all these episodes. Yes, I know what this show is about, and I know, yeah, a lot of people have thoughts on it. What I will say is what really interests me the most about this show is the unique premise of taking a magical girl show and focusing on the other perspective, the other end, if you will. And that is the villain side. So, I don't know, just focusing in on that specifically and delving into what makes not only the villains interesting from a villain perspective, but also seeing their relationship to fighting these magical girls in with like different types of powers. That was fun to watch. And there's a big twist in the end where like the villains end up fighting each other, and I thought that was a pretty good reveal and pretty good twist, and made the story interesting just for a little bit before it became generic again. So yeah, this is like the fan service show, by the way. But yeah, I don't know, this is someone's guilty pleasure, definitely not mine. I can see the hype around the MC though. The MC is very charismatic. Utena here. I do like it, Utena. But yeah, in terms of just everything it does right, like it does like 2 steps forward and then does 3 steps backwards, because half the content in this is so entertaining, so interesting, and then it reverts to tropey, generic garbage the next, like in the same episode sometimes, or back-to-back episodes. So I don't want to put it in D, but I'm going to put it, let's see, I'm going to put it right under Sasaki, in terms of it being like, it's not a mid show like Sasaki, but it's like, it's so good in some parts, so bad in the other, that it balances it out. So it's not mid, it's just average, like across the board. Like it doesn't deserve to be above or below, if you know what I mean. So yeah. Okay, so I know that we have been praising a lot of shows. I mean, look at my list, it's all above C tier. However, there are some sinkers this season, and we're gonna go into them. Because I'm a fair man, I like to judge things on their quality, and when there's drops in quality, I'm gonna call them out. And the first one is definitely a big drop in quality, and that is Firefighter Daigo Rescuer in Orange, something that I had such high hopes for. But the reason why it's on this list, and the reason why I am going to put it below C, is because this show had such great momentum, but they decided to not only give this more episodes than it needed, but it got so bad that they decided to stretch out, not even putting in filler scenes, mind you. They stretched out moments where there was just a panning of a wall and music playing and nothing going on. So you could see the production issues existing present in the show. And this isn't like from the start. It actually starts off pretty well. This is like when you keep watching, halfway through the season, it starts to show up. And I actually had to learn from a friend that the reason why they were doing that is because they didn't have enough content. And at that point, why make that episode count so long? But yeah, this show, I had such high hopes for it, and the production quality issues, as well as just the recaps are what just got to me. So I'm putting this in D. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend this for anyone. This is just a waste of time in my opinion. Because I don't know, I just have something against shows that when they start off so good, right? So interesting. And when they drop in quality, that to me, that's more offensive than just starting a bad show, because you know what you're getting into, right? So the next one is Tales of the Wedding Rings, and this is a harem anime. If you haven't seen, this is also a fantasy story, or fantasy setting, and it's an isekai. But somehow, when you have harem, when you have isekai, when you have fantasy, and you have a fantasy world with different races to explore and the different inner workings of royalty, especially with Frieren this season, and the fact that you don't capitalize on any of the interesting parts, the fact that you stayed to be one of the most generic shows of all time, such a boring premise to only service that really matters is just the fan service. Like, are you serious? This is an example of just pure and utter disbelief from my eyes, because I was expecting something more. Like, at least, like, I get it. I get it too. Fan service, awesome, right? You can have fantasy service in shows and it be good. For example, Danmachi, in my opinion, is an amazing fantasy story and it has a lot of fan service. But here's the thing. You gotta have a good story too. It can't just all be fan service. And that's what this show is. It's just pure fan service. The story is absolute dog water. And I don't like the main character. I think Sato is one of the dullest MCs I've seen, specifically for this season too. Crystal is another annoying female love interest that doesn't have a character. She's a block of wood. Nefertis is an elf girl, which when you have two elf girls this season that are top tier, and you come out here and give me one of the worst, what's going on here? Yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's lazy, it's boring, and I don't know, it's just a disappointment that you have great fantasy and this comes out too. It kind of spits in its face. So I'm throwing this Okay, it doesn't have production quality issues, so I'm gonna throw this above Firefighter Daigo just because the animation is at least consistent, but that's the only praise I'm giving it. And then, okay, quite honestly, this has to be the worst show of the season, and it hurts because it's another fantasy story, and it's an isekai too, so it's in my ballpark. My instant death ability is overpowered, is what you strive not to do. It is a big error in judgment when it comes to storytelling. When you give your main character the ability to kill any character, regardless of their power. And so you introduce a buttload of characters that you're not gonna remember because they get killed off. That's like the biggest sin. It's like, why would you introduce them and try and explore them when you kill them off 2 seconds later? Like, the amount of exposition in this story too doesn't make a lick of sense either. And I don't know, it has like all the sins I hate. You have like the generic shock factor, hook of a lot of lazy anime. You have the overpowered ability. You have the annoying female love interest or female MC who basically walks around and goes, ooh, looks pretty, and is there really for the fan service. You have generic side characters that don't really amount to much. Every other character gets killed off in an instant, so you can't grow any attachments. And it's just a shame that this show exists alongside Delicious in Dungeon, Frieren, Moonlit Fantasy, Shangri-La Frontier, Solo Leveling, Unwanted Undead Adventurer, Healing, Mashle, Ragna, just there's so many fantasies that are good, and you couldn't nail it. This is what happens when you let the wrong people adapt anime. I don't think this deserves an adaptation. There are so many other shows or source materials that deserve to be adapted. This is not one of them. So, this is going in F. Alright, last but not least, Chain Soldier. Okay, Chain Soldier, I'm gonna be completely honest here. I knew about it before the anime because people were talking about the manga. I think it was actually Giga made a video on it, and I watched it because I was interested. And he was talking about this this manga he was reading, and then apparently got an anime adaptation, and now here it is. And despite me using this chick for my thumbnail in my initial winter anime thoughts, I have yet to see episode 2 of this show. And I kind of feel bad for it, and I kind of don't. I was just watching so many shows at this point, and I just didn't really have the time to see it till the end, or at least past episode 1. But I'm going to finish. I'm going to get there eventually. But what I will say is, from episode 1, it does introduce an interesting world. It does introduce, an interesting concept of the mist and how these girls have basically superpowers, and the dude can basically transform into a giant kaiju like creature or whatever to fight off these enemies. So it has interesting, and yeah, it's for the fan service most importantly. That's why people like this show a lot. But overall, from what I've seen, and take this with a grain of salt because I've only seen 1 episode, I'm gonna throw this in C. I'm gonna think it's gonna be a high C. If Tomozaki is middle of the road, it's slightly above that. Now, is it top of the top? Nope, but I see value in it. And yes, it does suffer from a little bit of animation. I don't know. The CG for me, you can sort of recognize it, where it's not, I won't say it's bad CG, it's just, it could have been integrated better. Because I feel like people, when they see CG in anime, it's like, oh my god, it's terrible, why don't they just 2D animate it? Which, yeah, that they have some validity there, but for me, when I look at this show, I was just like, they have it for a reason, and I'm not mad at them, but I just wish it could be tweaked a little bit. That's what I'm saying. I'm give it, the way they did it look cool. I just think it could be better. That's my stance on the CG issue. But overall, so overall, I don't think it's a bad show, and let me know what you think. If you've seen the whole thing, do you think people should watch it? Is it like an S tier show that I'm just missing, or is it like one of the worst shows ever? Because I genuinely don't know at this point. So, yeah. So that's gonna be my list. I know we went through a lot. My voice is dying. But yeah, there's a lot of shows here that I've seen. I think there was a total of 20. There were some that were garbage, but as you can see, for the most part, a lot of them were good. And yeah, I think fantasy is at an all-time high right now. It is proving to be a very lucrative endeavor for a lot of animation studios too, because Delicious in Dungeon and Frieren are basically the most talked about shows, and for good reason too. So what do you guys think about my list? Do you disagree with my picks? Do you agree? What are your thoughts on some of these other shows too? I'd love to hear all your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to do this tier list with me, I put a link in the description as well. If you want to click that, I have the tier list up and running on TierMaker. And yeah, this is just my sort of video on that. There are going to be some big things coming. I know that this was a while to put out. It was one of my more bigger videos, but there's more things in the work. There's more videos. I'll be posting more consistently going forward. It's just this past week it was the Pokemon video, which was huge to do, and then this one was huge to film. I'm also planning something huge for come May, so be prepared for that as well. So yeah, I just wanted to share that, and yeah, let me know what you guys think, and you can't go wrong with it. Thanks for watching.